Michael Graham joins us now, the creative director at the Weekly Standard, and joins us now from Washington. Michael, thank you so much for the time today. We mentioned these three key positions set to be filled now, but I want to ask you first about Jeff Sessions. He's been tapped for Attorney General. Guests have joined us today who've pointed to perhaps a tough confirmation vote for him ahead. What do you see?
I think it's going to be fine. It's going to be relatively easy because people are forgetting it's Donald Trump doing the appointing. So imagine what else you could get besides Senator Jeff Sessions. Just keep that in mind. That's the Trump threat that lingers behind every appointment. To be a bit more serious, I mean, Jeff Sessions has a record in the U.S. Senate, I think, talking about offensive things that he said that came up in the 1980s, back when Reagan was president. It's going to be difficult 30-some years later when he has an actual record to look at for people to make that stick, I think. And I don't think anyone's issues with him have to do with jurisprudence, have to do more with politics.
You mentioned the racially charged comments, actions. Right. Again, in 1986, he was denied a federal judgeship after being nominated for it by President Reagan. What role do you see those comments perhaps playing, though, in this confirmation?
Well, I think that people who don't like Donald Trump, and there are a lot of them, will use those comments. They won't remind people that it was literally 30 years ago, and they'll say, see, this just shows Trump equals hate, et cetera. They're going to dust all that up. I agree. But it's interesting to me that Donald Trump has been doing a lot of outreach to people that surprise folks. So he's talking to Mitt Romney, talking to Ted Cruz after all their fights, et cetera. And people are wondering, gee, is this going to be the cabinet of his former enemies? Is he going to follow the Lincoln model? But have you noticed who've got the people who've gotten the job so far? Reince, Sessions, very loyal people to Team Trump.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Mitt Romney will be meeting with him, we're told, tomorrow. We've seen Ted Cruz at Trump Tower. We've heard Nikki Haley's name floated, perhaps, for Secretary of State as well. Do you see those simply as optical moments?
I'm not sure. I mean, I get a real sense, and I don't know Donald Trump, obviously, and at the Weekly Standard, they haven't had a lot of nice things to say about Mr. Trump, but he seems to be the kind of guy who has a pretty thick skin when it comes to his public persona. The reality TV thing where you're, beating each other up by day and then having cocktails at night. I think he has no problem talking to someone who was insulting him a week ago, and if they're nice to him right then, getting along fine. But I predict you will not see many of these outreach folks, many of these former enemies actually in major jobs in his administration. I think when it comes down to it, it's going to be the loyalists.
So another loyalist, retired General Mike Flynn,
right.
Tapped as National Security Advisor. Again, it bears mentioning he will not go through any sort of confirmation process. He does, though, enter the administration to come with some controversy dogging him. He tweeted earlier this year, in fact, that the fear of Islam is rational. Do you see issues then moving forward with this pick as it informs certainly a cornerstone position of Donald Trump's throughout the campaign?
Well, one thing that people are going to be reminded of in the next few weeks is his exemplary record fighting the war against terrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan, the, quote, lethal machine, as it was described, that he and General McChrystal created to take out al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then brought that record over to Afghanistan. But for people who don't understand why Donald Trump would pick someone who's taken these inflammatory positions, I think it really highlights one of the reasons why Trump has had some success. Remember, for more than 8 years, in fact, going back to the Bush administration, people who see a real problem inside of Islam, where they're having this civil war inside their faith between the extremist jihadists and then the vast mainstream majority, have listened to politicians say there's no connection whatsoever between Islam and the current terror problem. In fact, Hillary Clinton said that statement verbatim. It may be the dumbest thing ever said about the war on terrorism, is that it has no connection whatsoever with Islam. Donald Trump made a lot of miles by saying, look, I know, what the real fight is. And General Flynn, even though he's said it very, you could say, in not the best terms, is a guy that indicates that Donald Trump is going to continue this focus on, I see what the bigger fight is, and I think his supporters are going to react very warmly to that.
It bears mentioning, however, that another director of a super PAC that supported Donald Trump throughout recently invoked Japanese internment camps in avowing the existence of a Muslim registry, perhaps.
Right.
It seems as though this is still a situation that has steps to take here?
Well, look at the trouble we're having just having this conversation, because we all know the truth. The vast majority of Muslims around the world are peaceful and do not support terrorism. But we also know the truth that there's only one major world religion that has an ongoing problem right now with this level of violence. And it's hard to have an honest conversation without either inspiring the Islamophobes or inspiring the politically correct cowards, for lack of a better word. And I think Donald Trump is going to stumble over this again and again. My point is that his supporters are thrilled that someone like Mike Flynn talks directly about the problem. You may think that he overtalks it. You may think that from a strategic standpoint, it doesn't make the most sense. But his Trump supporters, this is what they wanted to hear. Someone who says, I know where we can find the bad guys.
Is Michael Flynn's history with President Obama now something of a badge of courage he wears?
I don't know about that. From what I understand, the people around him until this presidential season didn't even know what Mike Flynn's politics were. He's from Rhode Island, he's from a big Catholic family, in a blue state. And so this is all new. So I'm very interested. We did a sit down with him about 3 months ago over at the Washington Examiner Weekly Standard where I work. And he's a charming guy, no doubt about it. He's got kind of that gruff kind of, if you were casting a general for a movie, to go out and get him, to oversee Rambo, he's got that kind of personality. But I think the big issue is he's prepared to fight the fight that many of Trump's supporters want to fight.
It's also bears mentioning President-elect Trump certainly has an eye for casting, his history would suggest.
Very good point.
Congressman Mike Pompeo, a pick that many perhaps won't be discussing, if only for the other two today. What do you make of it for CIA?
I think pragmatically speaking, it's smart. It's also a seat that Republicans are likely to hold. That's something to keep in mind, even though they have a big majority. I think what pushes him into the front row is the fact that he really fought the Benghazi fight as far as anyone in the House. Representative Jim Jordan got a lot more of the headlines with that secondary report that they issued after the House Benghazi report came out. But Congressman Pompeo signed on to that, too. And once again, Fred Barnes of the Weekly Standard said in a podcast, in fact, yesterday, Trump has all the right enemies. And Mike Pompeo is another guy who sees who Trump's enemies are and wants to fight them.
Secretary of State, obviously now that looms, and certainly as these other key posts are filled, it looms even greater. Where do you see that going?
All the buzz is that it's going to go to Rudy Giuliani based on the fact that he just did so much so publicly. It's, the loyalty card is going to buy this for him. And reportedly what we're hearing around the Weekly Standard offices is that he really wants the job. Nobody's asking me, and they shouldn't. My record of predictions in this campaign has been horrifying. But I just don't get why President-elect Trump would want another lightning rod in the administration. If you were going to appoint a secretary of lightning rods, Trump has that job. If you want someone who's going to make headlines, he's going to do it. Rudy Giuliani is the kind of guy who tends to make headlines, tends to draw lightning. And in a high-profile position like Secretary of State, I just wonder if that won't be a problem down the road.
Is diversity something that the Trump inner circle is concerning itself with?
Well, I have no idea about the inner circle. I will say that you can make a case that the past 8 years has been marked by great intentions like Obamacare that resulted in really bad outcomes like Obamacare. And if the focus is on meritocracy, I think you're going to get a lot of positive vibe from Team Trump. Having said that, if you watch these rallies, if you've been following the Trump movement, then going back to the Tea Party movement, which is somewhat linked to that, these middle-aged, white folks who show up at these rallies love celebrating the diversity in their crowd. If there's a black speaker, if there's a Hispanic speaker, whatever, they shove them to the front. They want to celebrate them. So you'll certainly get this notion that that Donald Trump is going to create a white guys club for the sake of a white guys club is just not well informed.
You mentioned Obamacare. In sitting down with Leslie Stahl of 60 Minutes, he did speak to the idea that anything that replaces it will involve the allowance of pre-existing conditions. Right. He also seemed to want to make it clear that this will not simply be repealed and not immediately replaced with something equally as good. Obviously, experts have said, well, that's going to become exponentially more difficult to do. But this was also something he promised soon and very soon. What did you make perhaps of what could be described as a walk back of the rhetoric on the campaign?
I don't know that it's a walk back. I think it's a message to Paul Ryan and the Republicans in Congress. I am a small government, limited government guy, the Weekly Standard. That's kind of how we approach things, generally speaking. And, my take would be free market, let the free market do it, just get out. But Donald Trump understands that there are a lot of Americans who don't feel like the free market forces have served them well. They look at what happens when big banks get in trouble, they get a bailout, big government agencies, they get a bailout, but then the guy working for a living in Kentucky, what does he get if a manager screws up and kills his business? He gets nothing. And I think Trump is sending a message that he's not a free marketeer, and he is going to specifically be using government assets, money, et cetera, to try to take care of some people who might get left out, for whom globalization may be over a lifetime a positive, but for the next 5, 10, 15 years are a negative. He's going to look out for them. And I think he's sending a message back to the libertarian leaners like me. Hey, you're not going to get something out of the economics handbook here. I'm going to be keeping an eye on real people and using tax money to try to take care of them.
But if he goes after regulations, if he goes after Dodd-Frank, I mean, you could also argue then that might not trickle down to the real people of whom you speak.
Well, we could have a long, extended argument about who's actually being helped by this. I would say that the record of economic growth since we tried it President Obama's way and the Dodd-Frank way in 2009, 2010 stands for itself. It's been terrible. And so I'm not going to get the deregulation I want because Donald Trump is not a free marketer. You're going to have less regulation than maybe some people want. But who knows? It could be the case of a populist like Trump meeting a small government crew like the House Republicans could equal something kind of in the middle. And would that be so bad?
Michael, I want to get you out of here then on this one. This transition has been cast in various circles, perhaps, as being in a state of disarray. Others have pointed to the historical nature that essentially it feels right on schedule. Some have pointed to the fact that it seemed unclear on the part of the transition team to be perhaps in communication, for instance, with various specific departments. What do you make 35,000 feet up from what you've seen thus far?
Well, a couple things. Until we have the Zoe Baird, Kimba Woods moment where a Democrat has to keep sending out new AG nominees and have them shot down, I'm not worried too much about chaos. The first appointment usually occurs sometime in December for a cabinet secretary. Trump's ahead of that. But set that all aside. The people who elected Trump want some chaos. This doesn't bother them at all. The more that people here in D.C. are sweating and tugging their collars and wondering, what's going to happen, the happier the people between, in the middle of the country are. They hired Trump to get some chaos. Not too much, but some chaos. And so far, he's providing.
Interesting. I know you didn't see it, but while you were just answering that, we did put up a tweet from David Axelrod, who did point out that at this point in 2008, I don't remember having made any appointments, and I don't remember having been criticized for it. Something certainly to point out. Michael Graham, very much appreciate the time, sir, and the insight. Hope you'll come back and join us again soon. Thanks for it all.
Anytime.